Good evening all, and welcome back to Verified Whispers. By the time the police boarded my nearly empty bus, the man in the stolen transit jacket just smiled and said, "I guess you passed the test." Tonight, we dive into 5 true hitchhiker horror stories that will unsettle even the bravest among you. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Verified Whispers for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment when the darkness calls. Story 1. 1. The Silent Passenger. By the time the trooper held his phone up to my window, with that grainy wanted photo on the screen, my clothes were still damp from the rain, and the passenger seat beside me was already empty. The man in the picture was the same soaked stranger I'd let out on the side of the highway less than 10 minutes earlier. The same one who had ridden next to me in silence for almost an hour, clutching a small backpack like it was the only thing keeping him alive. The trooper's flashlight beam cut across my dashboard, the radio, the coffee stains in the cup holder, and then lingered on the faint wet mark in the seat cushion where that man had been sitting. When he finally asked, "You said you dropped him before the bend?" His voice sounded far away, like it was coming from the other end of a tunnel. Only then did it really hit me how close I'd come to something I had no business surviving. A few hours earlier, I was just a tired delivery driver, trying to make it through the last leg of an overnight route I'd driven so many times, I could have sworn I could do it with my eyes closed. My name's Caleb. I've been hauling for the same regional company for years, mostly night shifts, because they pay a little more and there's less traffic to fight with. Nights like this are the trade-off. Late autumn, just cold enough that the rain doesn't pour so much as cling in the air, turning the world into a tunnel of gray. That night, I'd started my route around 5 in the afternoon, loading pallets at the warehouse, listening to the usual small talk about football and weather, and how management still hadn't fixed the coffee machine in the break room. By the time I was on the return leg, it was close to 2:30 in the morning. I'd already hit 3 drop-offs in small towns that barely show up on a map. Little grocery stores, a closed hardware place where I had to slide paperwork under a metal door, a gas station that only had 1 pump still working. The cab smelled like a mixture of diesel, old coffee, and fast food. My eyes burned from staring through the wipers for hours. The radio crackled with the kind of late-night talk shows that feel like you're listening in on someone else's dream. I kept it on low, more for the company than anything they were saying. It was on one of those long stretches of interstate between towns, the kind where the reflectors on the posts become a metronome ticking you toward dawn, that I first saw him. At first, he was just a shape in the distance, a darker smudge against the wet shine of the road. As I got closer, my high beams carved him out of the rain, a thin figure in a dark hoodie, standing on the shoulder near the on-ramp for County Road 9, one arm half raised, fingers splayed, not quite in a full hitchhiker's thumb, but close enough that I knew what he wanted. Instinctively, my hands tightened on the wheel. Company policy is clear. Do not pick up passengers under any circumstances. I've heard that speech every year during safety training, usually accompanied by some blurry slideshow about liability and incidents. I've always agreed with it too. Night driving already comes with enough risk without inviting a stranger into your cab. So my first reaction was to keep rolling. As I passed him, the beams lit his face for just a second. The rain had flattened his hair to his skull and soaked his hoodie through. Water dripped off his chin. His eyes followed the truck the way a starving dog watches a piece of meat go by. I drove past. I told myself I'd done the smart thing. There wasn't another car in sight behind me, no one else out here in this weather, and the shape of him started to dissolve in my mirrors. That should have been the end of it. But guilt is a funny thing. You don't realize how much space it takes up until it's suddenly all you can hear. I thought about the temperature, about how far it was to the next town, about what could have happened to leave him standing there at 3 in the morning with no car, no umbrella, no backpack on his shoulders, just that one small bag held against his chest. I made it maybe another 100 yards before I found myself easing off the accelerator. "Don't be stupid," I muttered, to no one. I could almost hear my supervisor's voice in my head, could already imagine the paperwork if this went wrong. But then another thought beat it out. What if that was me? What if I'd slid off the road on black ice, and my phone was dead, and the only thing between me and hypothermia was the hope that some stranger might ignore their better judgment for 5 minutes? With a sigh that felt like it came from my bones, I flipped on my hazards and eased onto the shoulder. The truck rumbled as it slowed. In my mirrors, those twin red flashes painted the wet road behind me. I shifted into reverse and crept back along the shoulder until the figure stepped forward again into the wash of my taillights. When I stopped, he walked up to the passenger door without hesitation, like he'd known the whole time I was going to come back. Up close, he looked even thinner. The hoodie clung to him, the fabric dark with water. His jeans were soaked from the knees down, the cuffs heavy with mud. He had no visible luggage except for a small black backpack that he cradled against his chest with both arms. He opened the door without asking and climbed in like he'd done it 100 times, shutting it carefully behind him to keep as much rain out as possible. That bothered me a little, the way he acted like he belonged there, but I shoved the thought aside. "Rough night," I said, trying for a light tone as I put the truck back in gear. "Where you headed?" He stared straight ahead for a moment, then spoke in a voice that was low and ragged, like he hadn't used it in days. "Just past Ashfield," he said. "Anywhere after that's fine." Anywhere after that. People who know where they're going usually give you a town, an exit, a house. People who say anywhere are usually running from something. I told myself I was being dramatic and nodded, merging back onto the road. The engine groaned. The wipers squealed across the glass. Beside me, he shifted just enough to rest the backpack on his lap, and then wrapped his arms over it again, hands disappearing into the folded fabric like he was hugging it. For the first 20 minutes, the cab might as well have been empty. He didn't look at me. He didn't look out the window. His eyes seemed locked on some point ahead that only he could see. In the dim glow of the dashboard, I noticed his jaw was clenched, a small muscle jumping near his ear every time the truck hit a bump. I tried small talk more out of habit than real curiosity. "Break down back there?" I asked. He shrugged, a lazy roll of one shoulder. "Something like that." "You from around here?" "Sort of." Every answer was like that, vague enough that I couldn't get a handle on him, but not rude enough to give me an excuse to tell him to get out. After a while, I gave up and let the radio fill the silence. Some late-night host was rambling about conspiracy theories. Under it, so quiet I almost missed it, I started to hear the man's breathing. It was shallow and irregular, like he was trying not to breathe too loudly. The first real red flag didn't come from anything he said. It came from what he knew. We were passing an unmarked service road I barely ever take, a narrow strip of cracked asphalt that disappears into the trees, leading to a half-abandoned industrial park near a town called Old Mill. There's no sign for it, just a gap in the guardrail and a dirt-streaked reflector pointing down a hill. Without lifting his head, he said, "That goes to Old Mill, right?" My hand tightened on the wheel. "Yeah," I said slowly. "You from Old Mill?" He shook his head just once. "No." I waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. The radio host was laughing at his own joke. The wipers thumped back and forth. The hair on my arm started to rise. We drove a few more miles like that, until a faded billboard loomed up on the right. An ad for a motel just outside Ashfield. The paint was peeling, the phone number half obscured by a streak of rust. but I'd seen it so many times it was like an old friend. Most people ignore it. "Don't go through North Ashfield," the man said quietly. "Take the bypass." I glanced over at him. "Why's that?" He finally turned his head, and for the first time I really saw his face. Under the hood, his skin was pale to the point of gray. Shadows pooled under his eyes. There was something wrong with the proportions of his expression, like he was trying to imitate how a relaxed person looked and not quite getting it. "Cops like that stretch," he said. "They sit on the median for hours. You'll get stuck." There was nothing technically untrue about what he said. I've seen troopers on that stretch plenty of times. What unnerved me was how sure he sounded, and how intently he watched my reaction, like he was gauging how often I ran into law enforcement on my route. I shrugged. "I'll take the bypass then," I said, even though I'd already planned to. His mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile, or might have been a grimace. It was gone before I could decide. About half an hour after he got in, the low fuel chime dinged. I checked the gauge and frowned. I'd miscalculated. The last town's gas station had been closed, the pumps dark, and I'd told myself I'd make it to the big 24-hour place near the interstate spur instead. It wasn't critical yet, but I didn't want to risk running the tank too low with this weather. I cleared my throat. "Gotta stop for gas up ahead," I said. "You want anything? Coffee? Snack?" For a heartbeat, he didn't respond. Then his whole body seemed to flinch, almost imperceptibly. He turned his head just enough to look at me out of the corner of his eye. Even in the low light, I could see the tension there, coiled tight. "I'll stay with the truck," he said. And there was no hoarseness this time. The words were crisp, his voice lower, almost flat. "Man, it's warm in there," I joked weakly. "You sure? You look like you could use—" "I said I'll stay with the truck." The interruption was sharp enough that it cut off whatever else I'd been about to say. He didn't raise his voice, but it felt like he had. The backpack shifted slightly on his lap as his hands gripped it tighter. I swallowed and nodded, turning my attention back to the road. The station sat alone at an exit, a splash of too bright fluorescent light in a world of gray. 2 of the 4 pumps were taped off. The big sign flickered between gas prices and an ad for lottery tickets, the numbers smeared by the rain. As I pulled under the canopy, I glanced at the man. He was staring straight ahead, every muscle in his face rigid. His eyes flicked to the front doors of the convenience store and then away just as fast, like they were painful to look at. "I'll be 2 minutes," I said, killing the engine. He didn't reply. Inside, it smelled like burnt coffee and cleaning solution. A teenage clerk with dark circles under her eyes barely looked up from her phone as the door chimed. I grabbed a coffee I knew would taste like chemicals and stood at the window, pretending to pick a snack while I watched my truck. The cab light had stayed off. I could see the outline of his head in the passenger seat. It didn't move. As I paid, the clerk tossed a glance outside. "You got someone with you?" she asked. "Just a hitchhiker," I said. "Picked him up back on the interstate." She made a face. "In this weather? You're braver than me." I forced a laugh, took my coffee, and headed back out. As soon as I opened the cab door, the smell hit me stronger than before. Wet fabric, mud, something metallic and sour beneath it all that made the back of my throat itch. He hadn't moved. If anything, he was tighter. Shoulders drawn up toward his ears, hands locked over that backpack. It was when I set the coffee down that I saw his fingers clearly for the first time. The nails were chewed to the quick. The skin around them was ragged and raw. Under the nails, in the crescent where dirt usually lives, there was a dark stain that wasn't quite brown and wasn't quite red. It looked like something that had been scrubbed at with soap and hot water and still refused to come completely clean. "You sure you don't want anything?" I asked, mostly to cover the fact that I was staring. He slowly uncurled his fingers, as if he'd realized what I was looking at, and tucked his hands under his arms, deeper into the folds of the hoodie. "I'm good," he muttered. Back on the road, the rain somehow found a way to get heavier. My wipers worked double time, smearing light across the glass. The late-night radio show had moved on to callers talking about strange lights in the sky. I turned it down until it was just a murmur. The man beside me finally spoke again. "You drive this route every night?" he asked. I hesitated. "A lot of them," I said. "Why?" He shrugged, the fabric of his hoodie squeaking slightly as it rubbed against the seat. "Just seems like a lonely job," he said. "Long hours. Not many people notice if you're late." There was no obvious threat in the words themselves, but something about the way he said them made the temperature in the cab feel like it dropped a few degrees. "Dispatch notices," I said lightly. "They get real interested if I'm off schedule." He was quiet for a second. Then, "You drive it tomorrow?" That felt like a line being crossed, small as it was. Every instinct I had screamed not to tell him the truth. I lied without even thinking about it. "Nah," I said. "Day shift tomorrow. Different route." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw his jaw work. Maybe he was grinding his teeth. His fingers tapped once on the backpack, a quick, nervous rhythm, then stilled. We didn't talk after that. The road unwound in front of us, an endless ribbon of gray and white. The only other vehicles we saw were the occasional semi-roaring past in the opposite direction, their spray hitting my windshield like a wave. I kept glancing at the clock on the dashboard, counting down the miles to Ashfield and beyond, telling myself that in 20 minutes, in 30, in 40, this man would step out into the rain again and vanish back into whatever life I'd pulled him out of. That illusion shattered when the distant glow of flashing blue and red lights began to pulse through the mist. At first, it was just a faint strobe on the low clouds, an intermittent flash that my brain tried to file under accident ahead. But as we rounded a gentle curve and the road straightened, I saw the line of cruisers angled across one lane, cones funneling traffic into a single file, portable floodlights glaring down on the wet asphalt. My grip on the wheel tightened. State troopers in reflective vests stood under umbrellas, stopping each car long enough to peer inside. Beside me, the man sat up straighter. His fingers dug into the padding of his backpack, so hard the fabric indented. His breathing changed, shifting from that shallow, controlled rhythm to something sharper, faster. I could hear it over the rain now. "What's that?" he asked, though it was obvious. "Checkpoint," I said. "Probably looking for a drunk or something." He shook his head, hard, once. "Turn around," he said. "There's another way." "There's no exit between here and there," I said. "They'll just wave us through. It's no big—" "Drop me before it," he snapped. The word drop came out like a command, not a request. "Just before the curve. I'll walk." Adrenaline dumped into my system so fast, I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Every horror story I'd ever heard about people picking up the wrong stranger slammed into my mind at once. At the same time, a stubborn, angry part of me bristled at being told what to do in my own truck. "They're just checking licenses," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as I could. "You got a reason you don't want to go through there?" His head snapped toward me, and for the first time the mask slipped. There was real fear in his eyes now, raw and naked. But under it something else flickered. Frustration, maybe even anger. "Drop me here," he said again, slower, as if speaking to a child. "I'm not going through that." I should have driven straight ahead. I know that now. I should have let the troopers sort out whatever this was. But sitting there with his stare on me, the backpack clutched against his chest like an animal ready to spring, all I could think about was how small the cab suddenly felt, and how far it was between me and the nearest help if he decided he didn't like my decision. So I caved. "Fine," I muttered, easing the truck onto the shoulder. The rumble strip growled under the tires. We were maybe a quarter mile from the start of the checkpoint, just before a long bend that would block us from the trooper's line of sight once we rounded it. I brought the truck to a stop and threw on the hazards again. The man didn't move at first. He sat there, staring at the lights ahead, chest rising and falling too fast. Then slowly, he seemed to force his body into motion. He slid the backpack straps tighter, like a harness, and reached for the door handle. Before he opened it, he paused and leaned in closer, just enough that I could smell that metallic tang more clearly under the wet cloth smell. "Thanks for the ride," he said. "You should stop picking people up." The way he said it made it clear he wasn't giving general life advice. It sounded like a warning from someone who knew a little too much about what could happen if I didn't listen. Then he stepped down into the rain. The door shut with a soft thunk. In my side mirror, I watched him walk along the shoulder for a few seconds, head down, backpack hugged tight. Then the curve swallowed him, and he was gone. I sat there for a long second, hands frozen on the wheel. The truck idled, engine humming. The hazards clicked loud in the silence. Part of me wanted to throw it in park, run after him, wave at the troopers, and drag him back by the hood if I had to. Another part, the one that had been quietly screaming at me since I first reversed toward him, just wanted to get as far away from whatever I'd allowed into my cab as possible. The screaming part won. I pulled back onto the road and rolled toward the checkpoint, my pulse thudding in my ears. As I drew closer, a trooper stepped out, held up a gloved hand, and signaled me into the single open lane. I lowered the window halfway. Cold, wet air blasted in. "Evening," he said, leaning down to peer in. His face was lined with the kind of weariness that comes from standing in the rain for hours. "Where are you coming from tonight?" "Distribution center on Route 17, I answered, reciting the route I'd said 100 times. "Headed back to the depot." He nodded, glanced at my company logo on the door, then let his eyes wander around the cab. They paused on the extra coffee cup, the paperwork clipped to the dashboard, the empty passenger seat. His flashlight beam washed over the upholstery, lingering for a heartbeat on the faint, damp imprint where someone's back had been pressed. "You traveling alone tonight?" he asked casually. Too casually. My throat went dry. This was the moment where I could have lied and probably gotten away with it. I could see that path in front of me, clear and easy. But the image of that man's stained fingers, of him refusing to go through the checkpoint, of him knowing the old mill road without looking, those images piled up and crushed the lie before it could leave my mouth. "I picked someone up a little ways back," I heard myself say. "Hitchhiker. Dropped him off just before that curve." The change in the trooper was subtle but instant. His shoulders squared, his eyes sharpened. He straightened and lifted a hand in a small signal. Another trooper peeled away from a cruiser behind us and started walking along the side of my truck, shining a beam along the undercarriage and rear doors. "Can you describe him?" the first trooper asked, voice still even. I swallowed. Mid-30s, maybe? Thin, dark hoodie, jeans, small black backpack. Quiet, dirty nails, like he'd been digging or something. The trooper watched my face for a long second, then reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He tapped at the screen a couple of times, then turned it toward me. On it was a photo, half mugshot, half candid, like it had been grabbed from some DMV record and cropped badly. The man in the picture looked a little cleaner than the one I'd had in my truck. His hair was shorter, combed. There were no dark smears under his nails, but the eyes were the same, too still, too calculating. "Look anything like this?" the trooper asked. My stomach dropped. "Yeah," I whispered. "That's him." The trooper exhaled slowly through his nose. For a moment, the rain and the hum of the engine were the only sounds between us. Then he lowered the phone and spoke in a tone that was all business. "We're looking for this individual, in connection with a violent incident about 15 miles north of here," he said. "House out in the woods. Responding officers found 2 bodies inside. Neighbors reported seeing a man matching his description leaving on foot. Last credible tip put him near the old mill turnoff about an hour ago. Trucker said he tried to flag him down. Driver kept going. Called it in. Old mill. The unmarked road. My mouth tasted like copper. So I'm the one who stopped," I said, more to myself than to him. The trooper didn't respond to that directly. He asked me a few more questions. What time I'd picked him up, exactly where, whether I'd seen any weapons. I told him the truth. I hadn't seen a gun or a knife, but he'd never opened that backpack. For all I knew, it could have held anything from clothes to a disassembled rifle. When he was done, he stepped back and conferred quietly with his partner. One of them walked off toward the curve, radio pressed to his mouth. The other waved a couple of cars behind me around, sending them through with just a quick flashlight sweep. I sat there in the idling truck, hands welded to the wheel, feeling like the cab had shrunk around me. After a minute or two, the first trooper came back to my window. "All right, Caleb," he said, reading my name off my license file still in his hand. "We're going to send a unit to sweep back along the shoulder where you dropped him. You did the right thing telling us. Next time, though," he trailed off, eyes flicking to the empty seat again. "Next time, stick to company policy." He handed my license back. My fingers shook as I took it. I mumbled some kind of agreement I barely heard myself make. Then he slapped the side of the door twice, signaling me to go, and stepped away. The cruiser lights strobed across my windshield as I rolled forward and left the checkpoint behind. The rest of the drive back to the depot felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's dash cam footage in real time. Every shadow on the side of the road looked like a figure waiting to step into my headlights. Every gust of wind sounded like a fist hitting the side of the cab. I kept glancing at the passenger seat, half expecting to see him sitting there again, soaked and silent, backpack on his lap. When I finally pulled into the yard, killed the engine, and climbed down, the usual post-shift noises, the beep of reversing trucks, the clank of loading docks, the low murmur of other drivers talking, felt muffled, like I was underwater. I signed my paperwork with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. The night manager glanced at me. "You good?" he asked. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Something like that," I said, and walked away before he could ask more. For weeks after that, I couldn't stop checking the news. Every morning, I'd pull up local stations on my phone, scrolling for any mention of an arrest, a standoff, a suspect taken into custody. At first, there was a short article. 2 found dead in rural home. Police seek person of interest. It mentioned a male in his 30s, last seen wearing a dark hoodie, and the general area, but nothing else. No name, no photo, no capture. Then the article got pushed down by fresher tragedies. Car wrecks, overdoses, political scandals. The man who'd sat beside me became just another unsolved line item in a world that keeps moving no matter who falls off it. I went back to driving that same route 2 nights later. The first time I reached the County Road 9 on-ramp again, my pulse spiked. In the rain-streaked glow of my headlights, the shoulder was empty. No thin figure in a hoodie, no raised hand, just wet asphalt and a battered guardrail. I told myself I was relieved. But here's the part I still don't like saying out loud. Every time I've driven past that spot since, some nights when the rain is coming down just right, and the wipers are squeaking in that same rhythm, I swear I see him. Not clearly, not enough to slam on the brakes, just a suggestion of a shape in the corner of my eye. A man standing just outside the beam of my headlights, arm half lifted like he knows I've seen him once, and might, just might, stop again. And every time I keep going. Story 2, the wrong app ride. By the time the support message popped up telling me to follow the route exactly, and not deviate. The map on my phone said I was driving through a blank gray space that didn't even exist, and the man in my backseat had stopped pretending not to watch every move I made. I was a few turns away from a dead industrial cul-de-sac I'd never seen before, on a ride that wasn't supposed to go anywhere near that part of town. The notification looked exactly like the real corporate messages I'd been getting for 2 years as a rideshare driver. Same colors, same font, same friendly tone. But every instinct I had was screaming that whoever was sending it wasn't sitting in some call center. They were close enough to know my route, my habits, and exactly how to push me into the one place I never drive alone at night. My name is Lena, and for a while I drove for one of the big rideshare apps to help pay my way through nursing school. I did mostly nights and weekends because that's when the surge pricing made it worth it, and I could fit it around my clinical shifts. After a year, you get a feel for what's normal. The drunk couples arguing softly in the back seat, the chatty guys who tell you way too much about their breakups, the quiet rides where the passenger and driver both pretend the other doesn't exist. You also learn the unspoken rules, like which parts of the city you avoid after midnight, even if the app says high demand, and how sometimes the scariest thing you'll see is just someone throwing up on your floor mats. The night this happened, it was a Friday in late October, the kind of cold where your breath fogs the windshield edges, but the streets are still wet from earlier rain. Halloween decorations were still up in a lot of neighborhoods, cheap plastic skeletons blowing in the wind, orange lights in windows, that kind of thing. I'd started driving around 8 p.m. after a long day of classes, telling myself I'd knock out 4 or 5 hours, hit the weekend bonus tier, and then go home, shower, and crash. The app had one of those complete 12 trips between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. for an extra $80 promos running, and I was already halfway there by about 11. Most of the rides that night were standard downtown bar traffic. Pick up on a crowded curb, drop 2 or 3 people off in front of some other crowded curb, maybe get a "thanks queen" or "you saved us," and a few extra dollars in tips if they were drunk enough. Around 11:10, I dropped off a group at a club on the east side and pulled into a side street to check my phone and breathe for a second. My fuel was fine. My rating was still 496. I thought about calling it a night early, but the app pinged almost immediately with a new request. What caught my eye wasn't the location at first, it was the label. Instead of the usual ping, it flashed "Priority Ride" in a little gold bar across the top. That wasn't totally new. Sometimes the app would bump highly rated drivers to certain passengers, usually airport runs or corporate accounts. This one was different, though. The pickup wasn't at the airport or a hotel. It was at a strip of retail warehouses on the edge of the city, a place that was busy during the day, but turned into a dead zone after 10 p.m. The map showed a cluster of grayed-out buildings, one little pin in the middle, labeled with the passenger's name, Evan T. The fare estimate was higher than usual for the distance. That, plus the fact that it nudged me toward my bonus, made me accept, even though I didn't love the pickup spot. As soon as I tapped accept, the app flashed a quick message. "You've been selected for a priority ride. Please follow all suggested routes for optimal safety and support." I assumed it was some new corporate language and didn't think much of it. The drive to the pickup took about 12 minutes. The farther I got from downtown, the emptier the streets became. Storefronts gave way to dark warehouses and fenced lots full of shipping containers. My headlights swept across loading docks and roll-up doors, all locked and silent. According to the pin, Evan was waiting in front of a shuttered furniture outlet, its big glass windows black and reflective. As I pulled up, my stomach did that little twist it does when you're alone in a place that feels like it should be busier. There was one person there, standing under the flickering security light by the entrance. A man in his early 30s maybe, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He wasn't pacing or looking at his phone like most passengers. He was just standing, hands in his pockets, staring out at the nearly empty lot like he'd been there for a while. When he heard my tires, he turned his head and watched my car approach in the kind of slow, measured way that made the hair on my arms rise. I double-checked the license plate and name on my screen. Pickup. Evan T., white male, 5'10", dark hair. As I stopped, I rolled down the passenger side window a couple inches. "Are you Evan?" I called. He stepped closer into the light. His features were average in that way you forget as soon as you look away. Clean-shaven, short brown hair, dark eyes that didn't quite match the relaxed way his mouth tilted. He nodded. "Yeah." "Lena?" he asked, saying my name exactly like it appeared on the app. "Yep," I said, forcing a smile. "You can sit wherever." Most passengers go for the back right seat out of habit. He opened the rear door and slid in directly behind me instead, positioning himself just close enough that if he leaned forward he could reach my shoulder. I felt that more than I heard the soft thunk of the door closing. The smell that drifted forward was faintly chemical, like someone who spent a lot of time around cleaning supplies or a garage. He set a small black duffel on the seat beside him and kept one hand resting on top of it. As soon as the door shut, the app chimed softly, and the route populated on my screen. The destination was on the far western edge of town, a residential neighborhood I'd been to before. The route looked straightforward. Highway, then a couple of main roads, about 25 minutes total. I put the car in drive and pulled out. For the first few blocks, it was so normal it was almost boring. The kind of ride where you forget there's another person in the car until they sneeze or their phone buzzes. I merged onto the highway, set my speed, and glanced at the map. That was when the first route change happened. A little banner slid down from the top of the map. "Faster route found. Save 4 minutes by taking exit 19. The line on the screen curved off the highway sooner than I'd planned, cutting through a more industrial stretch of town. That wasn't inherently strange. The app does that sometimes when it detects traffic. But at that time of night, the highway was basically empty. There were no red lines showing congestion, no accidents marked. I hesitated, then shrugged and signaled to take the exit. Time saved was time closer to going home. As we curved down the ramp, the man finally spoke. "Yeah, that way's quicker anyway," he said, voice low. "I take it all the time." It was such a small comment that if my nerves hadn't already been tuned up from the dark, empty pickup, I might have ignored it. But something about the way he said all the time bothered me. The exit we were taking didn't lead to many houses. It was mostly warehouses, storage lots, and a big, half-abandoned industrial park. Not somewhere you take all the time unless you work there. "You live over here?" I asked, partly to be friendly, and partly to see what he'd say. He smoothed his hand over the duffel once. "Sort of," he said. "I'm staying with a friend near your app's drop-off. He works nights. I'm kind of between places." It was a plausible answer. I told myself I was being judgmental, stereotyping him because of the industrial route and the time of night. I adjusted my grip on the wheel and focused on the road. We drove in silence for a minute or two. The highway noise faded behind us, replaced by the hollow echo of our tires on patched asphalt. Street lights grew farther apart, turning into islands of yellow in a sea of darkness. My phone's mount buzzed as the map recalculated. That was when the message appeared. It slid onto the bottom of the screen like any other in-app support chat. A gray bubble with the company logo and a tiny headset icon. "Hi Lena, this is rideshare support," it said. "This priority ride requires enhanced monitoring. For your safety, please follow the suggested route exactly and do not deviate. We are tracking this trip in real time." I've gotten messages from support before, usually about lost items or fraudulent riders, but never during a ride, and never with that wording. For a second, I wondered if my account had been flagged, or if this passenger had some kind of note attached to his profile. I flicked my eyes up to the rear view. He was looking out the side window, face reflected faintly in the glass, expression unreadable. "Everything okay?" he asked without turning his head. "Yeah," I lied. "Just app stuff." The road narrowed as we turned deeper into the industrial district. Chain-link fences loomed on both sides, topped with curls of razor wire. Beyond them, I could see the hulking shapes of warehouses and shipping containers stacked like building blocks. The map showed our little car icon snaking through a maze of gray blocks. The destination was still pinned in the distance, but the path there now twisted in a way that made no sense. The route line bent us away from major streets and into smaller side roads, the kind I usually avoid because they're full of potholes and led to nowhere. I decided to test it. At the next intersection, the route told me to turn right down a side street that was almost completely dark. Instead, I went straight, intending to rejoin a better lit road parallel to the suggested one. Immediately, the app blinked, recalculating. The blue line snapped to a new path, and then, half a second later, jumped back to the original, demanding I make the next right instead. Another message popped up, this one in the same support thread. Reminder: for this trip's safety protocol, please use the recommended route only. Deviation may disable certain protections and incentives. The wording was just off enough to make my skin crawl. Disable certain protections. I'd never seen that phrase in any of the training or messages before. The incentives part hit me right where they knew it would. The promise of that extra $80 bonus hanging over my head. In the rear view, I saw the man's eyes now, watching the glowing map between us instead of the window. He met my gaze in the mirror for a fraction of a second and gave the smallest, most neutral smile I've ever seen. It didn't reach his eyes at all. "You can trust it," he said softly. "They know where we're going." I swallowed. My mouth was dry. "Yeah," I said. "I know." I took the next right like the app wanted. The street we turned onto was worse than the last. No painted lines, just a strip of patched asphalt running between rows of corrugated metal walls. Most of the buildings had no signs. A few had faded logos, half peeled off. One had graffiti scrawled across its loading dock doors that looked fresh. There were no houses, no open businesses, no other cars. Just us, the weak pools of my headlights, and the occasional flicker of a security camera's red light as we passed. That's when I decided to call for backup, not from the company but from someone who actually knew me. I wear a single earbud in my right ear when I drive, tucked under my hair so passengers don't always notice. Officially, it's for turn-by-turn directions, but everyone uses it to listen to music or take quick calls. Keeping my voice as steady as I could, I tapped my headset and said, "Call Jess." My roommate picked up on the second ring. "Hey, you still out?" she asked, her voice bright and sleepy at the same time. "Yeah, Mom," I said, putting just enough emphasis on the word that she'd know I wasn't talking to my actual mother. "Just finishing a trip. I'm heading to that place you hate, remember? With all the empty warehouses?" There was a tiny pause. "Jess is smart." "Right," she said slowly. "Send me your location. I'll keep an eye until you're done with that errand." I flicked my eyes to the mirror again. The man was looking at my face now, not the window. I forced a small laugh. "Yeah, I know it's late," I said, playing along. "I'll text you where I am. Don't worry." I hit the Share Live Location button in our chat without breaking stride. A little banner confirmed she could now see me in real time. But what unnerved me was what the map was showing her. "Okay, got it," Jess said in my ear. Why does it look like you're in the river?" My grip tightened on the wheel. "What?" "I mean, not literally," she said, catching herself. But your little dot is like off the streets. It's just gray around it. Did you go under an overpass or something? I glanced at my own screen. The car icon sat on a faint outline of a road, but the surrounding area was indeed gray, like the default background when the map hasn't loaded. No labels, no business names, no street names. Even the satellite view button was grayed out. Probably just the app being weird, I said through clenched teeth. I'll call you back in a few if it gets more weird. Lena, she said, and her tone shifted. If you get a bad feeling, bail on the ride. The bonus isn't worth it. Before I could answer, the app chimed again. Another support message. Hi again, Lena. We noticed you are on track for the priority bonus. Please remember that cancellations on special monitored trips may affect your eligibility and account standing. I hadn't typed to support. They were just watching, or someone posing as them was. Everything still okay? The guy behind me asked. The way he said it, like he already knew it wasn't, made my scalp prickle. Yeah, I said. Just my friend being overprotective. He chuckled once, low. Friends are good, he said. They notice if you don't come home. We drove for another minute or two, the map line bending us deeper into the maze. At one point, we passed a security gate that stood open, its arm raised like a skeletal hand, the guard shack dark. Another time, a motion light flicked on above a door as we went by, illuminating a patch of wall marred by what looked uncomfortably like old, dark stains. Finally, the blue route line showed our destination approaching, a turn into a narrow lane between two hulking warehouse buildings. There were no streetlights down it, just a long strip of shadow ending in what looked, on the tiny map, like a cul-de-sac or loading area. The app cheerfully announced, approaching destination on your right. I slowed as we neared the lane but didn't turn in. My stomach had knotted itself into something hard and hot. Everything about this felt wrong. The destination pin still claimed we were heading for a residential address miles away, but the route said otherwise. It was like the app had decided our journey ended here instead. Just take that next right, the man said, leaning forward slightly. I could see his reflection in the mirror now, his gaze fixed on the dark gap between the buildings. It doesn't show up right on the map. The service entrance is in the back. I think the app's glitching, I said. It says the neighborhood's still. It's not glitching, he cut in. It was the first time his voice had any real force behind it. I've done this drop before. Just go around back. It's faster. I let the car roll past the lane, pretending to look for a better marked turn. The second we passed it, the atmosphere in the car changed. His body language shifted from relaxed to coiled. I could feel his eyes burning into the back of my head. You just passed it, he said, flatter now. You were supposed to turn there. Yeah, I saw it, I said lightly. I'm just going to swing by the main road and come back. GPS gets weird out here sometimes. Almost on cue, another message popped up from support. Lena, we see you have deviated from the safety route. Please return to the suggested path. Unauthorized deviation may result in loss of incentives and limited access to future promotions. It was like whoever was behind it was eavesdropping, but only on my side of the conversation. Or worse, on my GPS. I ignored it. Instead of circling back toward the blacked-out lane, I followed the side street until it spat us out onto a slightly wider road, with at least a couple of working streetlights, and, in the distance, the blue glow of a gas station sign. At that point, I made a decision. I wasn't going anywhere darker with this man. I needed witnesses, cameras, and other human beings within shouting distance. Sorry, I said, letting a hint of frustration into my voice. Low tire pressure light just came on. I need to stop at that station up there for air. App will adjust. He leaned forward. I felt, rather than saw, his hand brush the plastic of my seat back. I'm on a schedule, he said. There was a new edge under his calm tone. I picked a priority ride because I needed to get there fast. Can you just follow the route like support told you? My heart hammered. I checked the dash. No warning lights were actually on. I lied anyway. I'm not blowing a tire in the middle of this place, I said. It'll take 2 minutes. For a few seconds, he didn't answer. The only sound was the fan and the faint hiss of the tires on damp pavement. Then I heard a soft, irregular tapping, his fingers drumming on the duffel beside him. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. You know, he said quietly, drivers who cancel this many priority rides usually get deactivated. The words hit me like a physical blow. Cancel this many? I'd only had one other priority ride that I knew of, and it had been fine. I flicked my eyes up to the mirror. He was staring straight ahead, but his right hand was visible now, resting on his thigh. In it, half hidden by the shadow cast from the headrest, was another phone. Not a passenger phone running the normal app layout, but something that looked like an internal dashboard. I caught a glimpse of my own name at the top, my car model, my rating, and a list of recent trips with status tags. His thumb hovered over a button I couldn't read. "How do you know that?" I asked, before I could stop myself. He met my gaze in the mirror, and for the first time his smile reached his eyes, just a fraction. "Friends," he said, "like your friend on the phone. People talk." We reached the gas station. It wasn't the kind with a full convenience store, just a pair of pumps and a small kiosk with bulletproof glass. But there were cameras mounted on tall poles, their lenses glinting. A lone man in a reflective vest smoked near the air pump, scrolling on his phone. The presence of another human being felt like oxygen. I pulled in and parked right next to the air station, nose pointed toward the road in case I needed to bolt. Before he could protest, I put the car in park and unbuckled my seatbelt. "Just going to check the tire," I said, and stepped out, leaving the engine running and my door open. The cold hit me like a slap. I walked around the front of the car slowly, pretending to inspect the tires while actually checking angles. From here, the station cameras could see almost the entire vehicle. The man in the vest glanced up, then did a double take when he saw how pale I probably looked. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just car acting weird." Behind me, I heard the rear door of my car open. My shoulders tensed. I didn't turn around right away. Instead, I stepped closer to the man in the vest, close enough that if I yelled, he'd have no choice but to be involved. The passenger got out of my car and stood by the open door, duffel in hand. Under the harsh white lights, he looked different, less like a forgettable man in a jacket, and more like someone who was calculating the distance between every person and object in his field of view. He watched me standing near the other man. His eyes flicked to the cameras. His jaw worked once. Something like disappointment crossed his face. Then, just as quickly, it smoothed out. "I'll get out here," he called. His voice had returned to that neutral tone from the beginning. "Signal's better if I walk a bit." I didn't move closer. "You sure?" I asked, raising my voice just enough that the guy in the vest heard me. "It's kind of a walk to your address," he shrugged. "It's fine. You've been helpful." He slung the duffel over his shoulder, adjusted the strap, and started walking toward the far end of the lot, away from the pumps, away from me and the cameras. After a few steps, he paused and looked back. "Drive safe, Lena," he said. "Some rides aren't worth the bonus." Then he disappeared into the shadows beyond the edge of the station lights. I stood there for a long moment, hands shaking, before I got back into my car. The app still showed the trip as in progress, the little car icon hovering in the gray no man's land. My support chat was open with that last message about incentives staring at me like an accusation. I hit end trip. The summary screen popped up, demanding a star rating for the passenger. My finger hovered over the options, then dropped to the bottom of the screen instead. Report issue. I selected passenger made me feel unsafe and started typing. When I got home later, after taking 2 more normal rides just to burn off the adrenaline, I wrote a full email to the company. I attached screenshots of the support chat, the weird map, the second priority message. I told them about the unofficial-looking wording, the way it mentioned penalties for not following the route. I didn't mention the second phone he had. I wasn't sure how to explain that without sounding paranoid, or like I was making it up. It took them 2 days to respond. When they did, it was through a bland support email. "Thank you for reaching out," it said. "We have reviewed your trip and can confirm that no official support agent sent messages during your ride. Our team will investigate unauthorized communications. At this time, the passenger account associated with this ride has been suspended pending further review. We appreciate your commitment to safety." I read that line 3 times. No official support agent sent messages. The screenshots were right there. The logo, the text, the interface, all perfect imitations. If it wasn't them, then someone with access to the system, or someone who understood it intimately, had built a way to talk to drivers in the exact language we'd been trained to obey. A week passed. I avoided late-night industrial pickups, turned down any ride that popped up with a priority label, and ignored the app's nagging about my missed bonus. Every time I drove past that stretch of warehouses, my chest tightened. Then, one night around 2:14 a.m., I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I hadn't driven that evening. The app was closed. I picked it up, half expecting a text from Jess. It was a push notification from the rideshare app instead. "You have a new ride request from Evan T," it said. "Pick up in 5 minutes. Priority rider. High demand in your area." I sat there in the dark, staring at the screen, watching the little countdown timer tick down the seconds before it auto-declined. I hadn't turned driver mode on. The app insisted I was offline. I turned off my phone, set it face down, and didn't open the app again for a long time. Story 3. Desert Vanishing Point. By the time I flicked on the dome light and turned to ask the girl if she wanted more water, the passenger seat beside me was empty. The door was still locked from the inside, and the seatbelt she'd just been wearing a minute earlier lay slack against the vinyl like no one had ever touched it. Outside, there was nothing but an endless strip of desert highway and the black outline of distant rock formations under a sky so clear I could see the Milky Way. There was nowhere she could have gone without me hearing a door open or footsteps on the gravel shoulder. I sat there in the humming silence of my idling car, heart thudding in my throat, staring at the indentation on the seat where her body had definitely been. And for the first time in my adult life, I wondered if exhaustion could actually make you hallucinate a person you'd shared water, conversation, and 40 miles of empty road with. My name is Miguel, and I make my living taking pictures of places most people drive past without seeing. Abandoned gas stations, old neon motel signs, the kind of dead roadside attractions that are left behind when interstates get rerouted. The desert is full of those places, little pocket universes that were busy once, and then just stopped. I've been driving those highways for years, sometimes alone for 6 or 7 hours at a stretch. I know the way heat can crawl into your skull out there, how the horizon shimmers until you're not sure where the earth ends and the sky starts. I thought I understood how empty it could all feel. I didn't understand how crowded the emptiness could be until that night. It was late July, one of those days where the temperature hit 110 by noon and never really dropped once the sun went down. I'd spent the day shooting a series of decaying motels along a 2-lane highway that used to be part of the old interstate before they built a faster, wider one farther north. The motels were sad and beautiful at the same time. Faded pastel paint, peeling off stucco, empty pools full of sand, rusted Coke machines with hand-painted "no power" signs taped to them. I worked until the light went from gold to that deep blue that only happens in the desert, then packed my gear, tossed it in the trunk of my beat-up sedan, and pointed myself toward home. Home was a small city 3 hours away. The first hour of that drive is the worst. Nothing but straight road, scrub, and the occasional distant glow of a town that's barely more than a gas station and a diner. I'd done it enough times that I had mental landmarks: an old billboard frame with no sign on it, a rock outcropping the locals call the Tooth because of the way it juts up from the ground, a weather-beaten bus stop with no route sign. I set the cruise control a little below the limit, turned the AC to barely adequate, and let some ambient music play quietly just to keep me from nodding off. I don't remember exactly when I first saw her. That's one of the things that bothers me. I remember a stretch of empty road, my headlights catching lines of reflectors on the right shoulder, the faint outline of the Tooth Rock up ahead in the moonlight. Then, the next image in my mind is of a figure stumbling along the white line, bare feet pale against the dark asphalt. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote or a strayed dog. As I got closer, the shape resolved into a person, a girl. She was walking on the wrong side of the road, facing away from oncoming traffic, listing slightly with each step, like her equilibrium was off. Her hair hung in clumps around her shoulders. Her arms were limp at her sides. There was no backpack, no phone in her hands casting light, no car pulled over nearby with hazard lights flashing. Just this lone, barefoot figure under a sky full of indifferent stars. Instinct took over. I tapped the brakes and eased onto the shoulder a few yards ahead of her, hazard lights blinking. As I came to a stop, I checked the rear view. She didn't react to the sound of my car at first. She just kept walking, head down, until she was almost level with my back bumper. That was when I opened the passenger window a crack and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" She stopped like someone had hit a switch. Her head turned slowly toward the sound. For a second, in my headlights, her face looked almost featureless, eyes too wide, mouth a pale smear. Then the illusion broke, and she was just a young woman, early 20s at most, skin red and blistered in places from the sun, lips cracked. Up close, I saw that her bare feet were filthy and nicked, her jeans torn at the knees, her t-shirt sweat-stained and dusty. She staggered a couple of unsteady steps toward the open window. "Water," she croaked. "Do you have any water?" I grabbed the half-full bottle from the cup holder and shoved it toward her. She took it with both hands like it was something fragile, unscrewed the cap, and drank too fast, choking and coughing halfway through. Water ran down her chin and soaked the front of her shirt. When she finally dragged the bottle away, she took a deep, shuddering breath like she'd been holding it this whole time. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do you want to sit down?" I asked. "I can give you a ride to the next town. It's like 40 miles, but it's better than walking." She looked back down the road she'd come from, then at the ribbon of darkness ahead. Something in her expression, panic, calculation, flickered and was gone. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah. Okay." I unlocked the doors and leaned over to open the passenger side from the inside. She walked around the front of the car, flinching a little when she stepped into the full beam of the headlights, then climbed in gingerly, as if every part of her hurt. The smell that came with her was sweat, dust, and a faint hint of something smoky, like the way your clothes smell after you've been sitting near a campfire. As she settled into the seat, I noticed more detail. Her arms were a patchwork of sunburnt skin and areas where grime had stuck in streaks, like she'd fallen and slid along dirt or rock. Her hands shook when she screwed the cap back onto the water. There was a small, fresh cut along her hairline, dried blood matted into the hair above her left temple. No obvious bruises, no obvious limp, but her whole body radiated exhaustion. I put the car in gear and pulled back onto the road. For a while, we drove in silence. I didn't want to bombard her with questions, but I also didn't want to let her sink into whatever shock she seemed to be teetering on the edge of. "I'm Miguel," I said gently. "What's your name?" There was a pause long enough that I thought she hadn't heard me. Then, "Hannah," she said. The way she hesitated made me wonder if it was the truth. "My name's Hannah." "Okay, Hannah," I said. "Where were you headed?" Her eyes stayed on the windshield, squinting slightly against the oncoming darkness. "Back to town," she said. "My town. There's a hospital there." "The next town is Red Mesa," I said. "Hospital's decent enough. Is that where you're from?" She shook her head just once. "Farther," she said. "But I can call someone from there." "Did your car break down?" I asked. "We passed a couple of turnoffs back there. I didn't see any vehicles." She swallowed. I saw her throat work in the reflection of the windshield. "We crashed," she said finally. "My friend and I. The car. It caught fire. I got out, but I don't know what happened to her. I started walking. I thought I'd hit the town by now." "How long have you been walking?" I asked. She glanced at the dashboard clock like she hadn't realized time was still real. Since it was light," she said. There was still some light. It was past 1 in the morning. If she'd been walking since sunset, that was at least 6 hours. Her lack of sweat now wasn't comforting. It suggested something worse about how overheated and dehydrated she might be. "You didn't try to flag anyone down?" I asked. "Didn't see anyone," she said. "Just you." Her answers weren't wrong, exactly. That stretch of highway is quiet at night. But something about the way she told the story felt like she was leaving big chunks out, like someone describing a movie they half slept through. We drove in silence for a while longer. The air in the car was thick with unasked questions. After a couple of miles, I spotted a comforting landmark, an old, rusted billboard frame on the right, once advertising some tourist trap long gone, now just a skeleton against the sky. I always clock it mentally because it means I'm about 40 minutes from Red Mesa. 5 minutes later, we passed it again. At first, I thought I was imagining it. There are plenty of beat-up signs out there. But this one was distinct. The way one of the vertical supports bent inward at the top, the shredded strips of old vinyl still clinging to the bottom crossbar, the ghostly outline of the long-gone logo. The exact same pattern flashed through my headlights a second time, and familiar unease pricked the back of my neck. I shook my head. "That's weird," I murmured. "What?" she asked. It was the first time she'd spoken since telling me about the crash. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just thought I saw that sign already." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you ever feel like you're not really going anywhere out here? Like you're stuck on a treadmill and the world's just looping around you?" The way she phrased it made me grip the wheel tighter. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Usually after too many hours in the heat." "You don't have to keep going if you're tired," she said, almost too casually. "There's a dirt road coming up. Truckers use it as a shortcut. You can pull off and rest a bit. It's faster back to town anyway." I looked at her. "What dirt road?" She pointed at the darkness ahead, to a spot where my headlights hadn't reached yet. "Just after the rock that looks like a tooth," she said. "If you turn there, you'll be in Red Mesa in no time." A chill ran through me. The tooth was what locals called that jagged rock outcropping a few miles ahead. It wasn't on any maps. You only knew about it if you'd grown up hearing stories, or if you'd driven this route more times than was healthy. I knew it. Guys at the gas stations knew it. How did she? "You're from around here?" I asked carefully. "You said your town was farther." She shrugged, wincing a little at the movement. "My friend was," she said. "He talked about it a lot." Until that point, she'd used friend in the singular when describing the crash. Now it was he. I filed that away. The rock appeared a minute later, jutting up on the right in my headlights, like some petrified fang. Immediately after, it was a barely visible break in the shoulder, where a dirt track veered off into the blackness. There was no sign, no reflectors, nothing to suggest it was a safer or faster way to anywhere. The app on my phone, which I'd been using mostly to keep track of distance, showed a straight line ahead to Red Mesa. The little car icon was on track. "Here it is," she said, her voice tightening. "Turn here. Trust me." I can't explain why I didn't. That's the part of the story that doesn't make me look good or smart. All I can say is that in that moment, the idea of taking my car off the relative safety of the paved highway into a pitch-black dirt road with no lights, no signs, and a stranger who knew too much about local landmarks felt like stepping behind a curtain I'd never come back out from. "I'm going to stay on the main road," I said. "I know this route. We'll be in town soon." Her reaction was immediate. She whipped her head toward me, eyes wide, the sunburn on her cheeks blanching. "No," she said sharply. "You don't understand. If you keep going this way, we'll miss it again. Just turn. Please." The word "again" snagged on something in my brain. "Miss what?" I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, swallowed. Her hand clenched so hard around the empty water bottle that the plastic crinkled. "Just turn," she repeated, voice cracking. "You're going the wrong way." My pulse thudded faster. A ball of dread settled low in my stomach. I forced my voice to stay calm. "The wrong way is off the highway into the dark," I said. "I'm sorry. I'm not doing that. We'll hit Red Mesa in under an hour, and I'll take you straight to the ER if you want. They'll check you out. Maybe even send someone to look for your friend." At the mention of an ER, her expression changed again. Fear, yes, but also something like resignation. For a second, I thought she might try to grab the wheel. Instead, she slumped back into the seat, face turned toward the window. Under her breath, so soft I barely heard it over the hum of the engine, she said, "We never make it that far." I pretended not to hear. "How long were you and your friend out there before you crashed?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation somewhere that would make sense. She didn't answer. Her reflection in the window looked like a double exposure, the ghost of her face floating over the smear of stars. We drove on. The GPS ticked off miles. The desert stretched, unchanging on both sides. I kept stealing glances at the odometer, at the comforting forward crawl of numbers. Every few minutes, I'd see some landmark and relax a fraction. Then something small would tilt the world off kilter again. Once, we passed a small roadside shrine I recognized, a white cross with plastic flowers stuck in a pile of stones, a faded photo in a weathered frame tucked into it. I'd photographed it before at sunset. Seeing it in my headlights now, I thought, we're making progress. That means we're closer. 5 minutes later, we passed it again. "Okay, that's," I started. "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't say it." "Say what?" I asked, though my skin was already crawling. "That we're going in circles," she said, "because that's what he said. And then he took the road. And that's when—" She cut herself off, breathing too fast, fingers digging into her thighs. I blinked hard, rubbed at my eyes. I was sweating despite the AC, a cold, sticky sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Look," I said, more to convince myself than her. "The map says we're heading straight. Those are just different shrines. People put them all over. They probably look similar." Even as I said it, I knew it was a weak lie. No two roadside shrines look exactly the same, not down to the same crooked cross and same pattern of chipped paint on the photo frame. "Do you see any other cars?" she asked suddenly. I looked. The road ahead and behind were empty. No headlights in the rear view, no oncoming beams, nothing but our own little cone of light moving through a sea of darkness. "It's late," I said. "Not a lot of traffic out here." She let out a noise that wasn't quite a laugh. "We saw 3 cars before," she said. 2 trucks and a sedan. One of them almost stopped. The other 2 didn't. Then the last one. I think he saw the smoke." "You said your car caught fire," I said softly. "Where?" "We've been on this road a while. I didn't see any sign of an accident." She didn't answer. Her eyes had that distant look again, as if she were watching something on the horizon that wasn't there for me. We drove in strained silence for what felt like a long time. At some point, we passed a mile marker. I glanced at my fuel gauge, at the clock, at the faint bar of cell signal taunting me in the corner of my phone screen. I thought about calling 911 and saying, "Hey, I picked up a barefoot girl who says she walked away from a burning car that doesn't seem to exist, and now my landmarks are repeating." I imagined the dispatcher's reaction. The next time she spoke, we were cresting a small rise. The land fell away slightly on both sides, revealing the hint of a dry wash. The stars seemed brighter there. "Do you believe in—" "I don't know." "Loops?" she asked. "Like people stuck in the same spot of road over and over?" I gripped the wheel hard enough that my knuckles whitened. "Like a ghost story," I said, trying to make it sound like a joke. "Like karma," she said. "You do something wrong, you don't get to leave. You just walk and walk, and every time someone almost helps, they turn down the wrong road." "We're not turning," I reminded her. "We're going straight." She looked at me then, really looked, like she was measuring whether she believed that. "You're the first one who refused," she said quietly. "He took it. He said it'd be faster. He just wanted to get off the road. The smoke was making him sick. He said the hospital could wait a few minutes." "Who's he?" I asked, even though I already knew. "My friend," she said. "Eli. He was driving." The name hung in the air like a weight. I swallowed. "What happened when you took the road?" I asked. She stared out at the darkness. When she spoke, her voice was flat, like she was reciting something she'd told herself too many times. "It didn't take us to town," she said. "It took us down into the wash. The road turns to sand. He kept saying it was fine, that his uncle used it all the time. We drove until the headlights caught the edge of the drop, and then we weren't on the road anymore. We were upside down. There was glass everywhere. The seatbelt was digging into my neck. He was screaming. Then he wasn't." I felt my throat close. "When was this?" I asked. "Tonight?" She turned to me slowly. In the glow from the dashboard, her eyes looked almost black. "Does it matter?" she asked. The way she said it made the hair on my arm stand up. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, it does. Because if it was tonight, I should have seen wreckage. I should have smelled it." Her lips twitched. "We're not good at being found," she said. Up ahead, the faint smudge of light that marked Red Mesa finally, blessedly, appeared on the horizon. A low orange glow against the stars. I latched onto it like a lifeline. "See that?" I said. "That's town. We're almost there." For the first time since she'd gotten in, something like relief softened her shoulders. "You might make it," she said. "What about you?" I asked. She didn't answer. We passed another mile marker. 5, then 4, then 3 miles to the exit. The closer we got, the more normal everything looked. The repeat landmarks stopped. The shrines didn't double. A semi rumbled past in the opposite direction, its wind buffeting my little car. I let myself breathe, just a little. "Once we get to the hospital, you need to tell them everything," I said. "About the crash, about Eli. They'll send state police out. They have helicopters for search out here sometimes. They can find burned cars. They can—" "Do you think they'll find him?" she asked, cutting me off. There was a desperate hope in her voice that hurt to hear. Yes, I lied. If he's out there, they'll find him. She watched my hands on the wheel for a long second. You're not a very good liar, she said softly. Yeah, well, I said, throat tight. I take pictures. I don't write fiction. She smiled then, a small, lopsided thing that made her look briefly like any other exhausted college kid who'd had a bad night. Pictures are lies, too, she said. They just pretend to be evidence. We reached the exit. The green sign for Red Mesa's main street reflected in my headlights. I flicked on my blinker, took the ramp, and turned onto the road that led into town. Streetlights appeared, then houses, then a fast food sign, then the boxy outline of the hospital on the hill. The whole time I could feel her presence beside me, a weight in the passenger seat, a quiet breathing pattern under the hum of the car. When we pulled up to the ER drop-off, the automatic doors whooshed open, spilling harsh fluorescent light onto the drive. A nurse in blue scrubs pushed a wheelchair out toward an older woman who'd just gotten out of a taxi. A security guard leaned against the wall, arms crossed, scanning the lot. I put the car in park and turned toward her. We're here, I said. Let me walk you in. They'll take care of you. The passenger seat was empty. For a second, my brain refused to process it. The indentation on the cushion where she'd been sitting was still there, faint, but visible. The empty water bottle sat in the cup holder on her side. The door was shut tight, the lock indicator still down. The window was rolled up. I hadn't heard anything. No click of the latch, no rush of air, no footstep on the pavement. My heart slammed against my ribs. Hannah, I said, stupidly, as if she might be hiding under the dashboard. The only answer was the faint ding of the car reminding me my door was still open. I got out slowly, legs trembling, and walked around to the passenger side. The concrete under the car was dry. No wet footprints, no trail of dust or blood. I opened the door. The seat was warm. The faint smoky smell was stronger here, mixed with sweat. The lock mechanism looked normal. The security guard watched me with mild curiosity. You need a hand? He called. I swallowed hard. I thought I had a passenger, I said. Never mind. He shrugged and went back to scanning the lot. Inside, an orderly pushed the empty wheelchair back inside for the next patient. I stood there for a full minute, hand resting on the open door, brain cycling through possibilities. Had I really picked her up? Had I been driving alone, delirious from heat and fatigue, talking to myself? My phone's maps timeline showed a straight route from the motel to the hospital. No weird loops, no deviations. But the part where I'd pulled over and sat with the hazards on, those GPS points were smeared, clustered over the same stretch like the app had been confused. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself she'd somehow slipped out, faster and quieter than physics should allow, and my brain had edited the moment out because it didn't fit the narrative of how doors and locks work. I told myself I was tired, that I'd driven too far, that the desert does things to your sense of distance. Then I locked the car, went into the hospital lobby, used the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and drove home without speaking to another soul. For a long time, I didn't tell anyone. You sound crazy when you say, I picked up a barefoot girl in the desert who vanished from my car when we hit town. It felt like the kind of story people whisper at bars, the kind that gets you labeled as the ghost guy. I went back to work. I edited my motel photos. I tried to sleep like normal. It didn't really work. A few weeks later, I was at a diner near that same stretch of highway, eating bad eggs and good bacon while my camera batteries charged. 2 highway patrol officers came in and took the booth behind me. I tried not to eavesdrop, but that's hard to do in a place with 6 tables and thin walls. You ever get anything on that burner out by mile 73? One of them asked. Nah, the other said. That Crash was months ago. College kids. Car went off the wash after dark. 3 bodies recovered, 1 never found. Probably got carried farther down or picked apart by coyotes. Or walked away, the first one said. They both laughed, but there was something in the sound that wasn't quite humor. I sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, every nerve suddenly tuned to their voices. Locals swear they still see her, the second trooper said. Barefoot girl on the shoulder, near the tooth. You know how it is. Vanishing hitchhiker. They've been telling some version of that one since my granddad's day. Yeah, well, the first trooper replied. This one's got a case file. That wash is a nightmare at night. Maps show a road there that might as well not exist anymore. Folks follow their GPS straight into soft sand and wonder why they can't get back out. Wouldn't surprise me if we get another one before the year's out. I paid my bill and left without finishing my coffee. Months later, when the desert heat had shifted from brutal to merely oppressive, I was going through my archives to put together a portfolio. That night was still lodged in the back of my mind, a splinter I couldn't dig out. I opened the folder from that July trip and started clicking through. Empty motel rooms, rusted pool ladders, the tooth-shaped rock at sunset, the old rusted billboard frame. One of the shots was a wide, long lens image of the highway near mile 73. I'd taken it on my way out as the sun was going down, trying to capture the loneliness of a single road, cutting through nothing. I'd never bothered to edit it. On my monitor, I zoomed in to check focus on the reflectors and the texture of the asphalt. As I did, a small shape on the shoulder resolved into more than a smudge. It was a figure, tiny in the frame, but unmistakable. A person walking along the white line, shoulders slumped, hair hanging down, bare feet pale against the dark strip of road. She was facing away from the camera, toward the oncoming dusk. For a long minute, I just sat there, staring, my finger hovering over the trackpad. Then I closed the file, shut the laptop, and went outside to stand under the sky. I haven't driven that stretch at night alone since, but sometimes, on clear evenings when the air is dry and the stars are bright, I think about the way she looked at that dark turnoff and said, "We never make it that far." And I wonder how many loops you have left before the desert decides you don't get to leave. Story 4. The Backroads Samaritan. By the time I saw his face on the local news, blurred because he was a minor, with the words, "Body found near Old Steel Bridge," crawling along the bottom of the screen, I already knew who he was. I knew the shape of his shoulders when he slid into the passenger seat of my truck, the way he limped when he climbed out near that same bridge, the way his fingers clutched the strap of his duffel like it was the last solid thing in his world. What I didn't know then was that the note they found in that duffel would mention me, the stranger in the pickup who'd done him one kindness on a night when he'd already decided exactly how it was going to end. My name is Darren, and this happened a little over 6 years ago, on a wet, miserable night at the end of winter. I'm not a cop, not a soldier, not anything people usually associate with horror stories. I'm a mechanic. I fix other people's cars in a town small enough that everyone knows which one is mine. I have a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage, and a dozen boring worries about bills and leaky roofs. I am, by most measures, painfully average. And yet, there isn't a single night I drive home after dark without replaying one short ride over and over in my head, wondering if there's a version of that night where I did something else, said something different, and the kid in the hoodie didn't end up under that bridge. The shop I work at sits on the edge of town, out past a string of feed stores and a shuttered lumber yard. In the winter, when the days are short and the work is heavy, it's not unusual for me to clock out at 9 or 10 at night. That evening I'd stayed even later, cleaning up a backlog of jobs because my boss had been on my back all week about efficiency. By the time I hung up the last air hose and shut off the bay lights, the only illumination left came from the sodium vapor lamps over the lot and the weak glow from the vending machine outside the office. I could feel the cold in my knuckles, in the ache at the base of my spine, in the way my breath steamed in front of my face when I stepped outside. The road home from the shop takes you across town if you stick to the main drag, past the chain restaurants, past the Walmart, past the high school and the hospital. But there's a quicker way, a series of back roads that weave through fields and scattered houses, and eventually over the old steel bridge that runs across the Blackwater River. Everyone local knows that bridge. It's narrow and rusted and smells like wet iron. In the daytime, it's just an inconvenience. At night, when the fog rolls off the river and the metal hums under your tires, it feels like driving across the ribs of something dead. My wife hates that bridge. "Take the long way," she always says. "I don't care if it adds 10 minutes. That thing's haunted or cursed or both." She doesn't like that there's no shoulder, no sidewalk, no real barrier between you and the drop if you take the curve too fast. She also remembers, like everyone else in town, the stories about the girl who jumped from it when we were teenagers and the guy who put his truck through the guardrail the year after. I roll my eyes when she brings it up, but I listen more than she thinks. I only take the back roads when I'm dead tired, and the thought of 10 extra minutes on the road feels like punishment. That night, I chose the shortcut. The drizzle started as I pulled out of the lot, just a mist at first, enough to smear the streetlights and make the windshield gritty. By the time I left the last cluster of businesses behind and hit the county road, it had thickened into something steadier. The wipers squeaked back and forth. The fields on either side of the two-lane were just flat, dark stretches where you could sometimes make out the glow of a farmhouse window far in the distance. I remember being more focused on the heater than the road for a second, fiddling with the dial to coax a little more warmth out of it. When I looked up again, my headlights fell on a figure walking along the narrow strip of gravel at the edge of the asphalt, hunched against the drizzle. He wasn't wearing a coat, just a dark hoodie and jeans. The hoodie's sleeves were pushed down over his hands. The hood itself was up, but even from behind I could tell he was young. Thin shoulders, that particular slouch teenagers have when the world feels too big and their skin feels too small. He was on my side of the road, walking with the traffic instead of facing it, which any driver will tell you is asking to get hit. I eased off the gas, my brain going through the checklist I'd built over years. Time of night. Weather. No sidewalks, no other cars in sight. Distance to the nearest house. Distance to the bridge. All of it added up to a single thought. What the hell is a kid doing out here right now? I drove past him at first. You always do. The first instinct is to say, "Not my problem," and let someone else take the risk. As my headlights washed over him, I caught a quick flash of his face in the side mirror. Pale, damp, eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. He had a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, the strap cutting a line across his chest. His mouth was set in a straight line that was too hard for someone that young. I thought about my own son, 15 at the time, and for a second, I saw him in that shape on the side of the road. The two thin arms, the way the hoodie hung a little loose like he'd outgrown his clothes lengthwise, but not widthwise. Guilt slid in where practicality had been. I drove another quarter mile, arguing with myself, then muttered, "Damn it," and hit the brakes. The taillights painted the wet road red. I checked the mirror to make sure no one was behind me. There wasn't, and then shifted into reverse. My tires crunched on the gravel as I backed up slowly, the figure coming, back into view, then growing larger until he was framed in my rear window. When I came to a stop a few yards in front of him and put the truck in park, he hesitated. He stood there in the drizzle, head down, then finally walked up to the passenger side. Up close, I could see that his hoodie was the kind our local high school sells, navy blue with the mascot printed on the front. The fabric was spotted darker, where the rain had soaked in. The duffel was cheap canvas, the zipper slightly broken near one end. He smelled like wet cotton and a faint hint of cigarette smoke when he opened the door. "Need a ride?" I asked, keeping my tone mild. You learn not to come on too strong with kids who already look like they're regretting being noticed. He glanced at me, eyes flicking up and then down again. His irises were a pale, washed-out color, blue or gray. It was hard to tell in the cab light. There was a bruise forming along one cheekbone, half hidden by the shadow of his hood. He nodded once. "Yeah," he said quietly, "if you're headed toward town." "I am," I said. "Hop in before you drown out there." He climbed in, pulling the door shut a little more gently than most people do. He sat on the edge of the seat at first, duffel clutched in his lap, as if ready to spring back out if I said the wrong thing. I put the truck back in gear and pulled forward. We drove in silence for a minute or two, the only sound the patter of rain on the roof and the rhythmic whish of the wipers. I could feel him there, small and tense, the way you can feel a live wire humming next to you without touching it. "What's your name?" I asked eventually. He hesitated, then said, "Reed." "Okay, Reed," I said. "You from around here?" He nodded. "Yeah." "Parents know you're out?" His shoulders bunched up a little under the hoodie. "They know I'm not at home," he said. "That's kind of the point." I didn't push. You get a certain kind of kid in a town like ours, the ones who've learned that answering questions honestly just gives people more ammunition. Instead, I tried to keep it simple. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "I can drop you somewhere in town. It's on my way." He shifted the duffel a little, like it was heavier than it looked. "My aunt's place," he said, "over by the high school." That narrowed it down to a dozen blocks. I decided not to ask for an address yet. If he really had an aunt there, he'd tell me when we got closer. If he didn't, that would become clear too. The drizzle outside intensified. The road narrowed a bit as we got closer to the river, hemming us in with a ditch on one side and the dark silhouettes of trees on the other. The old steel bridge itself was still a ways ahead, around a bend you can't see past until you're nearly on top of it. I stole another glance at him. He was staring straight ahead now, but his eyes weren't really on the road. They were on something past it. The bruise on his cheekbone was more obvious from this angle, a purple-green smear under the skin. There was a small cut just at the edge of his mouth, like he'd split his lip and it had started to heal, then cracked open again. "You okay?" I asked quietly. "You look like you've had a night." That got a small, humorless huff of air from him. "You could say that," he muttered. I weighed my next words. "You in trouble, Reed? I'm not the cops. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not dropping you into something worse than whatever you just walked out of." He tensed. "It's fine," he said. "I just needed to get away for a bit." The phrase, "get away," made something cold slide down my spine. There are all kinds of getting away. Some you come back from, some you don't. We drove another minute in silence. The wipers squeaked. My headlights carved tunnels through the mist. Out of nowhere, Reed said, "Do you think some people can tell when something really bad is about to happen to them?" It was such an odd question that for a second, I thought I'd misheard him. "What do you mean?" I asked. He shifted again, pulling one hand out from under the duffel strap to pick nervously at a loose thread on his sleeve. His fingernails were chewed down to the quick. "I don't know," he said. "Like a feeling. Like your skin knows before your head does. And you either listen to it, or you don't." I thought about the times I'd ignored that gut feeling and almost paid for it. Standing under a car that wasn't quite properly supported on the lift, taking a corner too fast in the rain when I was 19, and stupid, letting a stranger into my cab because I felt sorry for him. Yeah, I said. I think we get warnings sometimes. Not everyone listens. He nodded like that confirmed something for him. Yeah, he said softly. That's what I figured. We were getting close to the turnoff that would lead toward the high school if we stayed on the back roads. Old Mill Road cutting off to the left. Past that, another mile or so, the old steel bridge waited, spanning the black ribbon of water below. The road signs were slick and reflective in my headlights. Your aunt's place near Old Mill? I asked as the sign came into view. Or closer to town? He looked up, saw the sign, and I watched something flicker across his face. Fear, then determination, then something like relief. Closer to town, he said quickly. Can you just drop me at the corner before the bridge? I'll walk the rest. The corner before the bridge isn't much of a corner. It's a wide dirt turnout where the county plows dump snow in the winter, with a crooked speed limit sign and a rusted guardrail starting just beyond it. There are no houses on that stretch, no businesses, nothing but trees and the river fog. In the drizzle and dark, it looked like the beginning of nowhere. I frowned. It's wet, kid, I said, and you're limping. I can take you across the bridge and a little farther. It's no trouble. At the mention of the bridge, his whole body went rigid. His eyes tracked the road ahead, like he could already see the outline of the steel trusses through the fog. No, he said sharply. I don't want you going over. Just drop me at the corner. It's safer if, I started. He cut me off, voice suddenly tight. Please, he said, just the corner. I'll walk. I need a little time to think before I get there. There it was again, the word that landed wrong. There. Not home, not my aunt's, just this vague, heavy there. My hands tightened on the wheel. I could have insisted. I could have said, I'm not dropping you in the middle of nowhere at night. I could have driven him across the bridge by force of middle-aged stubbornness. Instead, I heard that other voice in my head, a mixture of my wife's caution and my own fear. Whisper, what if he bolts? What if he does something stupid while you're driving and you both go off the side? Guilt and fear wrestled in my chest. Fear won by a nose. Okay, I said quietly. The corner it is. He let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. Thanks, he murmured, for not going over. I don't want you anywhere near that. We rolled on in silence until the dim outline of the dirt turnout appeared ahead, a slightly lighter patch of dark on the right. I slowed and eased the truck onto it, tires crunching over gravel and old tire ruts. The bridge wasn't visible yet around the bend, but we were close enough that I could hear the faint rush of the river below, swollen from recent rain. I put the truck in park. Reed sat there for a second longer, like he was working up the energy to move. Then he slipped the duffel strap over his shoulder and reached for the door handle. Hey, I said before he could open it. You sure you're okay? You got somewhere safe to actually go? I can stick around until... He shook his head, cutting me off. You did enough, he said, and there was no sarcasm in it, just this tired sincerity that made my chest hurt. You were the last nice thing, I guess. The last nice thing. It landed in my gut like a stone. He opened the door. A breath of cold, damp air rushed in, smelling of wet dirt and river fog. He climbed down, boots scuffing the gravel. For a second he stood there with the door still open, leaning back in. The cab light made his face look even paler. If you have kids, he said suddenly, tell them it's okay to leave, that it doesn't make them cowards. I swallowed. You don't have to. He shut the door gently before I could finish and walked away toward the bend, duffel bouncing against his hip. The rain slicked his hoodie, turning it almost black. In my side mirror, his figure grew smaller until the curve of the road swallowed him. I sat there for a solid minute, engine idling, hazard lights clicking. The glow from my dashboard seemed too bright in the darkness. A knot of unease tightened in my chest, pulling my hands toward the wheel to follow him, to keep him in sight until I physically saw him walk into a lit neighborhood or up to a real house. Then the other thought crept in. This is how you get wrapped up in things that don't belong to you. This is how you end up on the news yourself. I thought about my kids asleep at home, my wife probably dozing on the couch with the TV on. I told myself I'd done enough. I told myself he was just blowing off steam and needed space. I told myself that if something was really wrong, he would have said more. I turned off the hazards, pulled back onto the road, and drove toward the bridge. As I approached, the steel trusses rose out of the fog like some rusted skeleton. The sound changed as my tires hit the metal grates, the hum deepening. Moisture beaded on the windshield. For a second, as I passed the midpoint, I had a flash of an image. Reed standing on the side, one hand on the cold rail, looking down. It was so vivid I had to fight the urge to slam on the brakes and crane my neck. On the other side, the road widened a bit and houses began to appear. Lonely trailers with one light on, a farmhouse with a porch swing creaking in the wind. By the time I turned onto my own street, I'd talked myself into believing that the worst part of the night was over. My wife was half asleep on the couch when I came in, the TV painting ghostly blue light across the living room. I kissed her forehead, murmured something about a long day, and went to bed. I didn't tell her about the kid in the hoodie. It felt like a small, strange moment in a long string of small, strange moments that made up night driving. The next morning, the sound that woke me wasn't my alarm. It was my phone buzzing on the nightstand, like it was trying to burrow into the wood. I fumbled for it, blearily checking the time. 6:17 a.m. My boss's name was on the screen. "Yeah?" I croaked, rolling onto my back. "You seen the news?" he asked without preamble. "Not yet," I said. "Why?" "Turn on Channel 3, he said. "You know that old bridge you like so much? They found a body under it." That woke me up faster than any coffee. I hung up without answering and went downstairs, heart thudding hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. My wife was standing in the kitchen, phone in hand, the TV in the living room turned up louder than usual. The words, "Breaking news," flashed in red at the bottom of the screen. "Darren," she said, eyes wide. "Isn't that—" I didn't answer. I moved closer to the TV. The anchor's voice was too bright for the content. "Authorities are investigating after the body of an unidentified teenage male was discovered early this morning beneath the old Blackwater Steel Bridge," she said. Grainy footage from a helicopter showed the familiar outline of the bridge from above, police tape strung along the road, cruisers dotting the turnout where I'd dropped Reed off. The county sheriff's office is treating the death as an apparent suicide, though foul play has not been ruled out. A bag containing personal effects, and what officials describe as a note, was found at the scene. They showed a blurred still of a boy in a school hoodie, his face smudged out enough to protect his privacy, but not enough that I couldn't recognize the angle of his jaw, the way his hair fell over his forehead. My stomach lurched. I went outside and threw up in the bushes. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I went to work because the alternative, staying home and marinating in my own thoughts, seemed worse. Every brake squeal set my teeth on edge. Every time the shop door opened, I half expected to see a deputy there, hand on his belt, asking if I'd been on that road last night. It didn't happen that day. Or the next. The story grew cold for the rest of town faster than it did for me. There were no dramatic updates, no mention of the note's content, just a sad little paragraph in the paper about counseling being offered at the high school and a reminder about mental health resources. People shook their heads, said, "Such a shame," and went back to worrying about their own kids. It was about 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, that a county sheriff's deputy walked into the shop. I was under the hood of a minivan, elbow deep in an oil filter that didn't want to come out, when I heard my boss say my name. "Darren," he called. "Guy here to see you." I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped out from behind the car. The deputy was in his late 30s, face lined but not yet jaded, brown hair going thin on top. His uniform was damp at the shoulders from the drizzle outside. He held a small notebook in one hand. "Mr. Engler?" he asked. "That's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He introduced himself, badge and all, then glanced around at the other guys in the shop. "Mind if we talk somewhere a little quieter?" he asked. We went into the small break room, the one with the microwave that only sometimes works, and the coffee pot that never gets truly clean. He shut the door behind us but didn't sit, just leaned against the counter. "You drive a red '09 Ford F-150, right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" He flipped a page in his notebook. "We're talking to a few people who were on County 12 the night of the incident at the bridge," he said carefully. "Witnesses, folks who might have seen something on their way home. We pulled some traffic cam footage from town, plus a bit from the gas station a few miles out. Your truck shows up on the camera at the corner of Old Mill and 12 around 10:30 that night, heading toward the bridge." My mouth went dry. I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Yeah," I said. "I take that road home sometimes. I heard about the kid. It's awful." He studied me for a second, then nodded. "It is," he agreed. "We're trying to put together a picture of his last few hours. See if there's anything we missed. Did you happen to see anyone walking that night? Near the river? On the road?" There it was. I could have lied. I could have said, "No, just me and the wet pavement." And maybe he would have gone away. Instead, the image of Reed's hunched shoulders stepping into my headlights rose up so sharply I almost saw him over the deputy's shoulder. "Yeah," I heard myself say. "I picked someone up." The deputy's pen paused over the page. "Picked him up?" he repeated. "Kid," I said. My voice felt like it belonged to someone else. "Hoodie, duffel bag, bruise on his cheek. Said his name was Reed. Said he was headed to his aunt's place near the high school. I dropped him at the corner before the bridge." The deputy's jaw clenched so subtly that if I hadn't been watching him like a hawk, I might have missed it. "Walk me through it," he said. So I did. I told him about backing up the truck, about Reed's odd questions, about the way he clutched the duffel, about asking to be dropped before the bridge, and insisting I not drive over while he was in the truck. I left out the part where I sat there arguing with myself, the long minute where I could have chosen differently. Shame has a way of editing. When I finished, the deputy closed his notebook and tucked the pen into his shirt pocket. "There was a note in the duffel," he said quietly. "We weren't going to release its contents publicly, but you're in it." My throat felt like sandpaper. "What?" I managed. He looked at me with something like sympathy. "He wrote about leaving home," he said, "about feeling like there wasn't a way to fix it. He talked about the bridge. And he mentioned a man in a red truck who picked him up when he thought no one would. He said you were the last kindness he'd experienced, and that he didn't want to bring anyone with him when he did what he planned to do." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to grab the back of a chair to steady myself. He already knew?" I said. "Before I picked him up?" The deputy nodded. "There were dates in the earlier part of the note," he said. "Plans. He'd been thinking about it for a while. I wanted that to make me feel better. It didn't." "There's more," the deputy said, hesitating. "You don't have to hear this part if you don't want to." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I think we're past that," I said. "Just tell me." He nodded. "He originally planned," he said slowly, "to jump when a vehicle was crossing under the bridge. To make his death look like an accident. He mentioned a truck. Something big enough that it would be over quick. His words. He changed that part after he met you. wrote that he didn't want to hurt the one person who'd done him a favor that night. So he decided to go when the road was empty. The room tilted. I sat down hard on the chair I'd been clinging to. In my mind, I saw my truck again, humming over the steel grates, the river sucking at the darkness below. I pictured a thin shape on the rail, fingers curled around cold metal, eyes on the faint glow of my taillights. So, either way, I said dully, I was part of the story. The deputy didn't argue. We don't think there was any foul play beyond his own intent, he said. Your name won't be in any reports beyond my notes. I just thought you should know why he asked you to drop him early. It wasn't about you. It was about keeping you out of it as much as he knew how. I nodded mechanically. He left a few minutes later, leaving me alone in the break room with the humming fridge and the stink of burnt coffee. Life went on, the way it always does. Cars still broke down. People still needed oil changes and brakes and tires. My kids still had school projects and soccer practice and phases where they slammed their doors a lot. On the surface, nothing changed. Underneath, everything did. I started avoiding the back roads. At first, I told myself it was for my wife's sake. She slept easier knowing I was on the well-lit highway, with its guardrails and multiple lanes and regular patrol cars. But the truth is, I couldn't make myself drive across that bridge for a long time without feeling like my lungs were being crushed in a fist. The first time I did it again, months later, was because of a detour. An accident on the highway funneled us all back onto County 12. My hands were slick on the wheel as the steel trusses rose ahead. The fog that night was thick, curling low around the girders. As my tires hit the grates, the sound roared in my ears. I glanced to the right, toward the spot under the bridge where the news helicopter had zoomed in. For a heartbeat, I saw him. Not clearly, not like a ghost in a movie, just a suggestion. A hunched shape at the guardrail on the right side, hoodie dark with moisture, duffel at his feet. It could have been a trick of the fog, the way it clung in clumps that looked like shoulders, like heads. By the time I blinked, it was just mist again. I told myself it was grief, guilt, an overactive imagination, except it kept happening. Not every time. Not even most of the time. Just often enough that I started to dread that stretch more than any other road I've ever driven. Sometimes, on nights when the drizzle was just right and the temperature hovered around freezing, I'd see a shape out of the corner of my eye near the corner where I'd dropped him off, a vertical smear of darkness among the trees that resolved, for 1 sick second, into a silhouette with a duffel over its shoulder. Other times, I'd be halfway across the bridge and feel this sharp, overwhelming urge to look up into my rear view, convinced that if I did, I'd see someone standing in the middle of the road behind me, staring. I never saw anything clear enough to photograph, nothing I could show another person without feeling like I was making it up. I didn't tell my wife the details, just that I hated the bridge now for reasons that went beyond rust and bad guardrails. When the subject of Reed came up in town, which it did now and then in hushed tones at the diner or after church, people would say things like, "At least he didn't take anyone with him," and "You never really know what's going on in someone's head." I'd nod along and sip my coffee and feel that stone settle a little heavier in my chest. Because here's the part of the story I don't like saying out loud. Sometimes, I think he didn't change his plan as much as we want to believe. He didn't take anyone with him physically. No. My truck stayed on the bridge. My body made it home. But pieces of that night came with me, whether I wanted them to or not. Every time I picture him standing in the drizzle beside my truck, saying, "You were the last nice thing," I wonder if kindness can be a kind of curse too. If knowing you tried, but not knowing if it mattered, is its own kind of haunting. If you ever drive that road, you'll see the cheap metal sign they put up after. One of those suicide prevention ones with a hotline number and a reminder that you are not alone. It's bolted to a post a few yards before the bridge, where the fog likes to gather. Every time I pass it, I think of Reed asking if people can feel when something really bad is about to happen to them. And I think about the fact that I did feel it, and I still let him go. I can't change that. All I can do now is slow down when I see someone walking alone on a wet night, roll down the window, and hope that offering a ride is, this time, the kind of kindness that keeps them on the road, instead of pushing them closer to the edge. Story 5. The Night Shift Test Ride. By the time the police boarded my empty bus and walked slowly down the aisle toward the one man still sitting there, he didn't look surprised at all. He just glanced up at me through the windshield, smiled like we were both in on some private joke, and said, "I guess you passed the test," before calmly putting his hands where they could see them. The officers flanked him, asked him to stand, and led him off into the flashing blue wash of their cruiser lights. As the door hissed shut behind them, I finally let go of the breath I'd been holding ever since I'd broken the one rule that night shift drivers aren't supposed to break. Never, ever pick anyone up off route when the bus is supposed to be deadheading back to the depot. My name is Joanna, but everyone at the depot calls me Joe. I've been a city bus driver for almost a decade, most of it on night routes. I like the quiet shifts, the way the city feels like a different animal after midnight. Softer in some places, meaner in others. You learn which stops still have people at 1 a.m., which corners you never want to linger at, which regulars will nod a thanks when they get off, and which ones will pretend you're part of the upholstery. The run I had that winter was the last route out to the industrial fringe, a loop that started in downtown, crawled past a couple of hospitals and late-shift factories, then wound back to the depot with an empty bus if everything went to plan. Policy is simple and drilled into you from day one. When your route is finished, your sign flips to "out of service," and your bus is considered closed. You don't open the doors for anyone unless dispatch tells you otherwise, and even then, it's supposed to be other employees only. Drivers, mechanics, supervisors, people whose faces you know and whose IDs you can recognize with one glance. Every driver has heard the stories about the one time someone bent that rule and bad luck came in through the doors. The night this happened, it was a Tuesday in late November. Cold enough that your breath fogged in the depot yard, cold enough that the vinyl seats inside the bus felt like slabs of ice when you first sat down. I started my shift at 6 in the evening, did the usual after-work commuter waves, the hospital staff changeover around 10, the bar crowd trickling home after midnight. By 1:15 a.m., I was on the last leg of my last loop, a few minutes from the end of the line. At that point in the night, my bus was usually down to 1 or 2 passengers, sometimes none. That night, I'd dropped off my last rider, a nurse with raccoon eyes from her double shift, at the stop near the South Hospital. After she stepped off with a tired wave, I pulled away, checked my mirror, and saw nothing but a row of empty seats and the yellow poles glinting in the dim interior lights. It's a strangely comforting sight when you're headed back to the depot. It means the hard part's over. I flipped the destination sign to "out of service," just like I always do, and started the route back. The way home is half on public streets and half on what we call the service road, a wide, mostly empty strip that runs parallel to the rail line, with access points for depots, yards, and maintenance sheds. We're not supposed to use it with passengers. That's the point. Once you're on that road, you're off duty in everything but the timetable. I just turned down the last stretch of regular road before the service entrance when I saw him. He was standing just beyond the final official bus stop, in the pool of light cast by a crooked street lamp, where the sidewalk ended and the chain-link fence of the rail yard began. He wore one of our company's navy blue jackets, with the Transit Authority logo on the chest, collar turned up against the cold. Dark work pants, scuffed boots. He had a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. When he saw my bus coming, he stepped closer to the curb and raised a hand, palm facing out. The universal, "Hey, can you stop?" gesture. Even with the destination sign glaring, "Out of service," some people still try. Usually they back off when they see the sign. This guy didn't. He kept his hand up, making eye contact as I rolled nearer, like he was certain I'd stop if he just looked at me long enough. I slowed as I approached the last marked stop, more out of habit than intention. The rulebook version of me should have rolled past without even tapping the brakes. The human version saw the jacket, the vaguely familiar cut of it, and thought, probably just a maintenance guy who missed the last employee shuttle. We all look out for each other on nights like that. No one wants to walk an icy mile along a dark road at 1:30 in the morning. I brought the bus to a gentle stop, opened the front door just enough to lean out and called, "We're out of service, friend. Headed back to the depot." He stepped closer, warm breath fogging in the cold air. Up close, I could see that the jacket was legit. Same reflective strips, same embroidered patch, even the little fraying at the cuffs you only get from months of use. He held up a lanyard with an ID card on it so quick I barely got a look at the photo. Just the flash of the transit logo and his first name, Greg. "I know," he said, speaking fast, his voice low and a little rough. "I'm night maintenance. Missed the last shuttle. Dispatch knows." I radioed in. They said if a bus was heading in this way, I could hop on. I'm just going back to the depot. That was just specific enough to sound true, just vague enough that if I refused him and it turned out I'd left a coworker in the cold, I'd feel like a jerk. I glanced up at the empty bus in my mirror again, then at him. He looked like he could be any of the guys I saw around the maintenance bay, late 30s or early 40s, lines at the corners of his eyes, stubble shadow, on his jaw, a weariness that matched my own. "You radioed dispatch?" I repeated. "They cleared it?" He nodded. "Yeah. Said to look out for bus 34. That's you, right?" He jerked his chin at the fleet number stenciled on the side. That tripped something in my head. Our radios are public enough that anyone within earshot can catch pieces of conversation, but knowing my exact bus number and that I'd be the one coming down this road meant he'd either heard more than a casual snippet, or he'd heard it from someone inside. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was tired and jumpy. I hesitated one beat too long, and he must have seen it. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "If it's a problem, I can walk. But I've been on my feet 12 hours crawling under carriages in the yard, and it's cold. I'm not asking you to go out of your way. Just the depot gate. 30 seconds. If dispatch gives you grief, you can say I flashed you my ID." Which I did. He held up the lanyard again, a little longer this time. I caught the photo. The man in it looked like the man in front of me. Same jawline, same dark hair. Employee number under the name. All of it looked painfully ordinary. I made a choice. "All right," I said. "Come on. Just stay behind the line while I'm moving." He gave me a nod that read as relieved and climbed up the steps, boots clanging softly on the metal. He didn't sit in the front disabled priority seats like most employees do when they hitch a ride. Instead, he walked past the yellow standee line and took a seat about halfway down the bus, on the right side. He placed a small tool bag on the seat next to him and rested his hands on his knees. I closed the doors, shifted into gear, and pulled away from the curb. For a minute or two, everything felt normal. The bus engine rumbled. The interior lights buzzed faintly. The city slid by in patches of sodium orange and shadow. I radioed dispatch out of habit once I had a clear stretch of road. "Dispatch, this is 3 to 4, I said, keeping my tone casual. "Just confirming. Did anyone authorize a maintenance pickup at Bay Road for depot transport?" There was a crackle. Then the dispatcher's voice came through, tinny but clear. "Negative, 3-4, she said. "No authorized pickups after your last stop. You're clear to return to depot alone. Everything all right?" I kept my eyes on the road. "Copy," I said. "All good." As I hung the radio mic back on its cradle, I glanced in the mirror. The man, Greg, according to his badge, hadn't moved, but his posture had changed in a way that's hard to describe. He was still sitting, hands still on his knees, but there was a new stillness in him, like a coil wound another turn tighter. He caught my eyes in the mirror and held the look for half a second, then smiled. It was small, polite, almost apologetic. "Radio's been acting up all night," he said conversationally. "Interference. Out by the yard? They probably didn't catch it." "Maybe," I said. I flicked the destination sign panel off, dimming the front of the bus a notch, and turned onto the service road entrance. The asphalt here is different, smoother, less pitted, because only city vehicles use it. Fewer streetlights, though. The world outside narrowed to my headlights and the occasional glow from a rail yard light tower. Chain link fences and stacked containers stretched into the darkness on either side. It was on this road, with no stops, no passengers, no traffic, that the questions started. "You drive nights a lot?" he asked after a beat, voice low but easily heard in the quiet bus. "Mostly," I said. "Someone's got to move people at ungodly hours." "You run this route every night?" he asked. "Same times? Same roads?" I shrugged. "Depends on the schedule. Why?" "Just curious," he said. "Always wondered how predictable you all are. How many nights a week the same driver takes the same dead run back alone." Alone. The word slid under my skin like a splinter. "Company likes predictability," I said lightly. "Makes the spreadsheets happy." He chuckled once, a dry sound. "Yeah," he said. "Predictability's real useful. If you're trying to plan something." I told myself I was overreacting, reading menace into small talk because of too many late-night crime shows. Still, I found my hand drifting toward the lower part of the console, where a small, labeled button sat under a flip-up plastic guard. The silent alarm. If you press and hold it, it sends a code to dispatch without making a sound in the cab. We're trained to use it sparingly. We're also trained to trust our gut. Up ahead, the service road dipped under an overpass, the concrete tunnel amplifying the rumble of the engine. The bus's interior lights reflected faintly off the windows, turning them into a patchwork of my own face, empty seats, and the shadow of Greg's cap. He spoke again, this time more slowly. "You ever hear about that driver who went missing a few years back?" he asked. "Night shift. Bus turned up empty near the depot, doors shut, hazard lights on. No one ever figured out where she got off." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Every driver in the system had heard some version of that story. Officially, it was an unsolved case. One of our colleagues, a woman named Carla, who never made it home from a late route. Her bus was found parked crooked near a side gate, engine running, driver's seat empty. Her personal stuff, bag, phone, radio, was all still inside. No sign of her. The company didn't like us talking about it, but rumors floated around anyway. Everyone had a theory. None of them were reassuring. "Urban legend," I said too quickly. "People like to scare new hires." He watched my eyes in the mirror, saw the lie, and smiled slightly wider. "Sure," he said. "Urban legend." We passed under the bridge and climbed the slight rise on the other side. Off to the right, I could see the faint outline of the depot's main entrance road up ahead, where it branched off from the service lane. That road was lit at least. There was a 24-hour grocery store across from the gate, its bright parking lot a little island of normalcy at the edge of the industrial sprawl. I focused on that light, like it was a lighthouse. "Hey, question," he said quietly. You all still use that little code phrase on the radio when you feel unsafe. Something about checking the fare box. That stopped my heart for a beat. The phrase he was talking about was one we'd been taught in a training years back, a way to signal to dispatch that you needed help without tipping off a passenger. You'd say something like, "Dispatch, this is 3-4. Can you log a fare box issue for me?" And they'd respond with a specific route number to acknowledge they understood it wasn't really about money. Only drivers and radio staff were supposed to know it. We were told never to say it outside of official channels. "How would you know about that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. He shrugged. "Like I said," he replied, "people talk. Mechanics, supervisors, drivers. Word gets around." I realized then that I'd never actually seen him in the break room, never passed him in the hallways. The jacket and ID said he belonged. My memory did not. The service road curved slightly, hugging the rail line. As we rounded the bend, the lights of the depot entrance came into view in the distance, small and far, but real. Between us and them, though, was one more dark stretch, where the road passed alongside a row of old warehouse buildings, their blank backs turned to the bus lane. This was the part everyone hated at night. No cameras, no public access, just a narrow, walled corridor of asphalt and concrete. As we entered that stretch, Greg stood up. Not all the way, not walking the aisle, just rising halfway from his seat and stepping one row closer into the next set of seats nearer the front. I hadn't heard his boots over the engine. 1 second he was mid-bus, the next he was within 10 feet of the yellow line, his face clearer in my mirror. "Sir, I need you to stay seated until we stop," I said, more sharply than I meant to. He raised his hand slightly, palms out. "Relax," he said. "My legs cramped up. Long shift." He sat again, but he sat one row farther forward. We rolled through the shadow canyon. My brain was working too fast, trying to line up the facts. Unauthorized pickup, fake-sounding story about dispatch, curiosity about my schedule, knowledge of the code phrase. My finger slid under the plastic guard of the silent alarm button and rested there. I made a decision. I picked up the radio mic with my free hand, pressed the button, and said, "Dispatch, this is 3-4. I'm on the service road inbound, just passing. Sector C, I think I've got a minor fare box issue I'll need logged when I get in." There was a pause, a beat where I was terrified the dispatcher on duty would be a newer hire who didn't know the code. Then her voice came back, calm, but with a slightly different cadence. "Copy that, 3-4, she said. "We see you on C-Line. Confirm. You're still running Route 34 tonight." "We don't have a Route 34. Our buses are numbered in the hundreds. Routes are in the teens and 20s. 34 was the number we'd been taught as the "I heard you" flag. My shoulders loosened a fraction. "Affirmative," I said. "Route 34. I hung the mic back up. In the mirror, Greg's expression had changed. The polite mask had slipped a bit, revealing something cooler underneath. "You all really do stick to the script," he said, "even when you're scared." "I'm not scared," I lied. He tilted his head, studying me. "You should be," he said quietly. "Not of me. Of how easy this has been for a long time." Up ahead, the dark corridor ended. The service road merged into the wider lane that led to the depot entrance. I could see the glow of the grocery store parking lot now. A handful of cars, a couple of people talking near the entrance, the comforting anonymity of late-night shoppers. I guided the bus toward that light instead of turning directly into the depot. "What are you doing?" he asked, a new tension in his voice. "Checking something," I said. "Tire felt funny a mile back. I'm going to pull by the store and take a look. Won't even take a minute." "We're almost at the gate," he said. "No need to. Company policy," I cut in, borrowing the authority of that phrase. "Can't risk taking a disabled vehicle into the yard. You know that." He stared at me in the mirror for a heartbeat, then leaned back, eyes sliding to the window. His jaw worked once. "Fine," he said, but the word had lost its earlier smoothness. I pulled the bus up along the curb as close to the grocery store entrance as I could get without blocking the fire lane. Outside, under the bright white light of the parking lot lamps, a stock boy in a reflective vest was corralling carts. A middle-aged woman loaded bags into the trunk of her car, her teenage daughter scrolling on her phone beside her. Cameras blinked red from the corners of the building. I put the bus in park, engaged the brake, and stood up. "Stay seated," I said, as professionally as if he were any other passenger. "I'll be right back." I walked down the 3 steps slowly, making sure my body language read as routine, nothing out of the ordinary. As I stepped onto the cold concrete, I caught the stock boy's eye and gave him a nod. His gaze flicked curiously from me to the mostly empty bus and back. "You okay?" he called. "Yeah," I said, just checking a noise. I walked around the front of the bus, bent theatrically to look at the front tire, then moved along the side. Through the tinted windows, I saw Greg sitting where I'd left him, tool bag on the seat, hands resting on his thighs. He didn't get up. He didn't try to bolt. He just watched me, expression unreadable, as I walked the length of the bus and back. When I came around to the front again, a police cruiser was pulling into the far end of the lot, lights off, moving slow. Dispatch had been quick. The car angled itself behind my bus, close enough to block it in without making a show of it. Only when they were in position did the red and blue lights flick on, washing the back of the bus and the store facade in color. The stock boy swore under his breath. The woman by her car froze, her daughter finally looking up from her phone. 2 officers got out, one older, one younger. The older one spoke into his shoulder mic, eyes on me. He approached at a measured pace. "Driver," he called. "You Joe?" "Yeah," I said, heart pounding. "He's still on board." The officer nodded. "You did fine," he said quietly. "Wait by the cruiser." I stepped aside as they climbed the steps onto the bus. From where I stood, I couldn't see much, just the glow of the interior lights and the silhouettes of the officers moving cautiously down the aisle. One of them said something I couldn't catch. The other responded. Then I heard Greg's voice, clear as a bell. "You took longer than I thought," he said. I was starting to think she'd just go all the way in. There was a rustle of fabric, the faint clink of metal. A minute later, they were coming back down the steps with him between them, his hands cuffed in front. He wasn't fighting. Not really. There was no shouting, no dramatic struggle. He moved like a man who'd expected this outcome and was mildly disappointed it had taken this long. As he passed me, he turned his head a fraction, just enough that I could see his face clearly under the parking lot lights. His eyes were dark and steady. Up close, without the cap shadowing his features, he looked less like a generic maintenance guy and more like a composite of every face you don't remember on purpose. "Guess this one passed the test," he said softly. "What test?" I asked, before I could stop myself. He smiled, a small, almost fond thing. "Seeing who follows the rules," he said, "and who opens the doors when they're not supposed to." The officers eased him into the back of the cruiser. The door shut. The younger cop came over to get my statement, while the older one talked quietly to dispatch over his radio. The grocery store people pretended not to stare. Later, in the bland, fluorescent conference room at the depot, a supervisor and a transit security rep sat me down and filled in some of the blanks. The ID badge he'd flashed belonged to a real employee, had belonged. The actual Greg had quit almost a year earlier. His locker had been cleaned out, but a jacket and one old badge had gone missing during a chaotic shift change. No one had thought much of it at the time. Security footage from various nights showed the same man who'd been on my bus, lurking near late stops for weeks, always just outside the circle of light, always stepping away before the bus doors opened, like he was studying the pattern. Which drivers kept to their routes, which ones took shortcuts down dark maintenance roads, which ones bent the rules for someone in a logo jacket and a tired story. As for the missing driver from a few years back, the one whose bus turned up empty near the yard, no one could say for sure if he'd had anything to do with it. There was no footage of her picking him up, no fingerprints they could tie definitively. All they had were overlaps, similar stretches of road, similar times of night, the same blind spots in the camera coverage. "That's not something we're going to put in a memo," my supervisor said, rubbing his temples. "But between you and me, I'm glad you hit that code when you did." I went back to work after a couple of days, because that's what you do. Buses still needed to run. People still needed to get to graveyard shifts and early flights and late classes. On my first night back on the route, I took a deep breath as I approached the last stop near the rail yard. The crooked street lamp was still there, humming faintly. The patch of sidewalk where he'd stood was just wet concrete. My bus sign flipped to "out of service" right on schedule. I passed the stop without slowing. Sometimes, when I'm deadheading back to the depot now, I feel the old habit trying to kick in, the impulse to brake when I see someone in a jacket waving at the curb, to crack the door and ask where they're headed. But what happened that night changed something permanent in the way my hands move on the wheel. Because here's the part that keeps me up some nights. If I'd seen him a year earlier, before all the rumors and the trainings and the story of the missing driver, I might have taken him all the way in without a second thought and never hit the radio at all. I might have been the one whose bus turned up empty, hazard lights blinking in the dark. Now, when a shape appears at the edge of my headlights after hours, I make eye contact, shake my head, and keep going. And every time, in the corner of the mirror, I can almost see a man in a transit jacket watching the bus go by, hands in his pockets, already looking for someone else who hasn't learned that some doors, once opened, don't close as easily as they should.